Thanks very much, everybody. I am Camedda, and here I have Kathy Connolly. I'm just going to leave the space to our head of school, Professor Anne David, who's going to welcome us into the seminar. Thank you.
Okay. Hello, everybody online, and hi, everyone here. It's great to see such a mix, but nice numbers here and nice numbers online. So I'm delighted to introduce
So they
this.
can also see.
I'm delighted to introduce this this project, PEER4ID, which is one of those really important projects that runs in the School of Education, which not only develops knowledge, in-depth academic knowledge about experiences in the real world, but also contributes very closely and tightly to people's experiences and to policy out there amongst the people in the world. So just to say that PEER4ID is funded by the Irish Research Council through an excellent funding scheme called the New Foundation. It is New Foundations, right?
Yes,
New Foundations scheme, and it's in collaboration with Inclusion Ireland, where we have we'll have an introduction from their CEO here in just a moment, from Derval. So because of this kind of connection, so the project kind of grew within the remit of TCPID, and Donatella has run with it across, a wide-ranging, wide-ranging number of settings, working with people with intellectual disability and their families, and people within who are interacting with them in various settings. And the connection with Inclusion Ireland means that this is going to have real impact in the world. And I think, first of all, it allows that engagement with people and their lived experiences, but also for that engagement to be extended and for that the influence of the work to continue long after it's finished. So I'm really delighted to present this. I'm very interested to hear how everything went. And I think the next step is for me to ask Derval to come up. So Derval McDonough, who is the CEO of Inclusion Ireland. We're delighted to have you here, Derval. I'll hand over to you.
Right. Yeah, I'm going to try to remove myself because the camera keeps following me. Okay, let's see if it works. Can you see yourself?
I can see myself. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. Hi, everyone in the room, and hi, everybody online. Really lovely to be here with you. And thank you so much to Donatella and to Kathy for the warm invitation. As per the introduction, I'm Derval. I'm the CEO of Inclusion Ireland. And for people who don't know us very well, we're the national advocacy organisation for people with an intellectual disability. So we've been in existence for over 60 years now. And I suppose we pride ourselves on being at the forefront of the disability rights movement. And we work across the lifespan, as we support and advocate for and with children with intellectual disabilities, right up through education and school, right into third level employment, further education and training, transport, every issue that you can name under the United Nations Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities, we absolutely advocate around. And it's a real pleasure to be here this evening in this collaborative process with Trinity, and back to my alma mater as well. So it's always a nice excuse to come through the front gates. So I suppose in speaking to Donatella in advance, what we thought might be useful to just mention a little bit in advance of hearing all the good work that has happened is why collaboration is so important between organisations, particularly third level institutions and advocacy organisations. And I suppose, as I mentioned at the outset, we're obviously working towards this vision that we have of a more inclusive society at Inclusion Ireland. And there's many challenges and many barriers, as we know, that people with intellectual disabilities and their families face every day of the week. So doing it alone is not an option. If we're to actually work to systematically improve and remove some of those barriers, we have got to work collaboratively. And I think the opportunity to work with our colleagues in Trinity is always something that we welcome with open arms. I suppose another reason for collaboration is across both organisations, and we are lacking, of course, in resources, and it's really important that we pool our resources and be as impactful as we possibly can, so we can play a role in terms of dissemination of the results and making sure that it reaches a wide audience. And Trinity can play their incredibly important role in making sure that we've got really strong Irish-based data to work off in our advocacy efforts. And I suppose as well, for an organisation like us, we pick up, from speaking to people every day. We run a phone, a support line, so people call us looking for information and advice and support, and we meet people through focus groups and consultations. So we're picking up from our community every day the barriers. But what's really important when we're advocating is that it's not just anecdotal evidence that we have, it comes from a really strong evidence base, and that's where Trinity comes in. We can combine our efforts, what we're hearing from the ground in our community, combined with really strong research, means that we can advocate better and stronger together. So that's incredibly important too. And I suppose I'll hand back over to Donatella in just a second, but I suppose what we're going to hear this evening, and from what I've picked up so far from the team, it very much chimes with what we find in our work every day, the very real barriers that people are facing when it comes to accessing their right to employment. We ran an extensive consultation process during COVID with over 200 self-advocates, people with the lived experience of intellectual disabilities across the country. And one of the main issues that came up, it won't be any surprise, was around employment and the right to employment. And since then, we've run a project with the Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission, steered by a group of self-advocates in collaboration with employers. And again, the same themes and information were coming out loud and strong. And if I was to kind of capture those in two broad themes, it would be around attitudes and accessibility. And the attitudinal barriers are really real and present for people. And we have got to do more to unpick that and to uncover why that is, why we don't have bigger ambitions for people with intellectual disabilities leaving school, and why we don't have high expectations. And I think we need to start addressing that together more and more. And the accessibility barriers are incredibly real as well. And for people with intellectual disabilities, there are very real accommodations that people need in the workplace to thrive and to flourish. And we've got to name those and unpick those to make sure that people can have their place in the workforce. That's about all that I'm going to say this evening, but I really welcome the opportunity to be here with you all, and I'm looking forward to hearing in more depth the results, and look forward to more collaborations with you to move forward together. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, now it's time to explain something about this project, which is called Promoting Education and Employment Resources for People with Intellectual Disabilities in Ireland. And the project is, as Anne, David, and Derval, of course, said, is in partnership with Inclusion Ireland, and was funded by the Irish Research Council, now Research Ireland, now called Research Ireland. And the scheme within this project was funded is called New Foundations. And the strand was a civic society engagement. That's why we have a civic partner on the project. And the early talks around having that evidence that Derval has mentioned that is really needed in terms of, informing both research and policy around the issues that people with intellectual disabilities face on the daily life, but especially on the transitions in and in between or towards education and employment, was that, the collaboration, the spark among few partners in a very kind of unstructured way while I was working in TCPID, forming a sort of unofficial consortium. And that's when the idea of putting together this proposal came within. And thankfully, funding, I have this, so I don't need to move, funding came in. And we were able, over the course of a little bit more than a year and a half, to, gain quite few outcomes for this project. So the PEER4ID, that's the acronym of the project research team, is myself, Dr. Donatella Camedda, and Catherine Connolly, who's a research assistant and PhD student here in Trinity College, Dublin. We also had a previous research assistant that we would like to acknowledge, was Catherine Murray. So both research assistants, who I thank very much, had done a great and incredible job. And of course, I want to thank Inclusion Ireland for the partnership. What is this project about? The project explored the transition to third level education and employment and everything that is in between these big areas of life for individuals with intellectual disabilities. We engaged with people with intellectual disabilities and their families. We engaged with third level education institutions and employers separately, and also with support services that operate across all Ireland. The project goals were to uncover key challenges and opportunities faced during these transitions. So for people with intellectual disabilities, transition is not always direct, is not unilateral. There are a lot of back and forth and different pathways that can occur. And we wanted to know what was happening, for them, what were the challenges, but also to inform the policy in order to enhance support systems for inclusive employment and inclusive third level education with some evidence-based, research. And, final goal, of course, is the promotion of inclusive environments for the people with intellectual disabilities, nonetheless, for everybody that is involved, in this, with them. The background, why doing this research was important. Systemic barriers. People with intellectual disabilities face systemic barriers, as many other people with disabilities, but especially accentuated in limitation of opportunities in education and employment. I just want to check one thing, that the people online can actually see me. I don't know if anybody that is online, maybe you don't need to see me, that's okay? Okay, great. Thank you, Connor. So the limitation of opportunities and what Derva was saying about accessibility is a huge barrier, increased barriers compared to other groups of the population. Unequal access, higher risk of exclusion compared to peers without intellectual disabilities, but also compared to peers with disabilities that is not an intellectual disability. And the impact on life is huge. And research, there's plenty of evidence that shows that equal opportunities improve quality of life, and not having those equal opportunities has a detrimental effect on the quality of life. We know this from anecdotal experience of people, as mentioned before, but we do need more evidence-based. And what happened when I first had the idea of putting together this proposal is that I could see the research was done in one area of employment, research was done in the area of third level education globally. Research was done around the quality of life with service providers, but there was nothing, especially at an Irish level, at a national level, that would put together all these perspectives. So that's how this project came together, and these are the research questions that guided us along the way. The first one: what challenges do individuals with ID face when they transition from school to further education, training, or employment, and in between? Because I said, it's not that linear. There's no education and employment. Sometimes there's education, a little bit of employment, and then I got again education, or education, and then where do they go? What challenges do the stakeholders face while facilitating this transition? So stakeholders have a huge important role, but what are the challenges that they feel are facing and need to be tackled? And the third research question is, what resources are out there to support education to employment and in-between pathways for people with intellectual disabilities? Trying to understand resources with what support is available, what practical support, what other type of support, emotional support, peer support, what is out there. But we are also interested in understanding how this is working. Is the how, not just the what. Okay, although this question does begin with what? Methodology applied in this project. And for those who are not in the area of research, we tried to make the slides as much, user-friendly as possible. Like non-academic audience, hopefully will understand methodologies, how we conducted this piece of work. What did we do? So we used what is called mixed method. So what we did, we combined interviews, so qualitative research, and surveys that has a little bit of quantitative element in it. So we interviewed 5 people with intellectual disabilities, 3 families, and 9 participants that were stakeholders. 3 were employers or people working in the company or work environment that had people with intellectual disabilities as employees. 3 were higher education staff, lecturers, or other roles that were working with people with intellectual disabilities within a 3rd level education, and service providers. With the surveys, we had 6 employers. The surveys were anonymous, so we don't know who responded. There were 6 coming from the work environment. Hello, welcome. Take a seat, grab a cup of tea and a biscuit. And 6 service providers. Now, a lot of data there. Okay, data is all the information that we gather and generate talking and receiving responses from respondents. What did we do with this? So we had 17 interviews and 12 surveys. It's a total of 29 pools of data. So we ran what is called thematic analysis. So we looked at the qualitative aspects, elements of what we were seeing, especially for the interviews and some part of the surveys, and we identified recurring emerging themes, the themes that were more relevant, what the people were telling us was more important. And then we analyzed all of this and we interpreted the findings through what is called ecological systems theory. And we're going to explain that a little bit later. The project coverage. Now, we went through a lot of struggles. As researchers, we always do. It's difficult to generate data. It's difficult to recruit participants. It's difficult to hear the voices of the people we would like to, have the loudest presence. But we actually managed to have a national coverage. All 4 provinces were covered among the participants and 10 counties specifically. So even though we had, higher expectation in terms of the number of people we could include in this project, I think that overall, what we're going to deliver today in terms of findings shows, a good representation of what's happening in Ireland. Although some findings cannot be, generalized, they cannot be applied to everybody because, of course, it's still a very small proportion of population that we could involve with this project. Okay. We will need some time to go through the findings because, as I said, we got a lot of data and that's great. We managed to interview 5 people with intellectual disabilities. We wished to have more on board, but we are grateful to them and to all the participants to give their time because taking part in research is great, but it requires time. It requires organization. So everything that we're going to try to convey here is preliminary findings. When the report will be ready, there is going to be like a fuller account and explanation of what we learned with this project. Let's have a look at the findings, some of the findings from the surveys. And I explained to you, the surveys had a quantitative part, so few questions that we can summarize with some numbers, and other parts that we can summarize with words. What happened when we asked about the employment outcomes for people with intellectual disabilities working in a company or in a business? So from what the 6 respondents mentioned, we see that the employment outcomes are lower compared to other employees. So we have low employment application submissions, they apply less. There's a discrepancy between the number of applications that they receive from people without intellectual disabilities and what they receive, from people with intellectual disabilities. Low successful interview process and the employment offer. So again, there's a lower outcome. There's a low participation in entry-level employment at entry level. And that's, something that is really alarming. No career progression or promotion to higher salaried opportunities. And we're going to see that later when we look at even the interviews and more general outcomes of the study, that this is not because the employers don't want to promote people with intellectual disabilities. This is not because people with intellectual disabilities can't progress in terms of what they can do in their job, but there are other issues around that. And there's a low retention rate. So although we had one from the companies that replied saying that there's a retention rate around 3 to 5 years, all the others were around like a year or months. And that also reflects what kind of employment is there for people with intellectual disabilities. That we can say employment, but employment has many forms. And especially for people with intellectual disabilities in Ireland, the form often found is the work experience or unpaid work experience. A little bit of spoiler of what's coming. Another finding from the employer surveys. Now we asked about inclusive resources, inclusive strategies, and we offered a long list they could tick for anything that was available in their work environment, in their company. And quite strikingly, they didn't select so many. So in fact, we only have peer support, disability support departments, this diversity acceptance, that could be either policies or initiatives, accessibility of information on disability support for all staff, individual needs addressed. But what's really missing and what was striking is that none of the 6 respondents, and we had one very large company involved, but none mentioned regular training staff. Now, we know that training is pivotal, it's essential everywhere. And we found this, quite interesting, why? And, maybe there are some initiatives elsewhere, but from the 6 respondents, none has mentioned. And also other strategies weren't mentioned, they weren't selected. So yes,
that mirrors with the service providers and said as well that they managed to do initial training, but that ongoing training is a huge challenge.
Thank you, Kathy. So surveys, because we had employers and higher education institutions, we're going to provide some information around, and then for the interviews, we are not going to look at the employers and the service providers, the higher education institutions, just because we don't have enough time. But in the report, there will be all the account. And it's quite interesting. And we see a lot of matching data from what emerged in the surveys and what emerged in the interviews. About involvement and roles of employees with intellectual disabilities. We have mention of minimal involvement, or some companies are at a very early stage. there's a mention, there's 3 times a mention of the partnership and the pathways built up with an higher education institutions. We already see how the collaboration is absolutely fundamental, and how the collaborative piece, to lead the structured pathway into education is not only a way to open the access that is often closed and blocks and hinders progression even in life, but it's also quite interesting because it shows that the local initiatives might work well, but what if the local initiative is not there? What's going to happen? And yeah, quite, a few positive, mentions about having, people with intellectual disabilities as colleagues, as rewarding, refreshing. Sometimes it's not disclosed or tracked. So again, there's really an inconsistency there. But one aspect that we picked up was the reference, the mention of the structured pathways in collaboration with the with programs in higher education institutions. And here we come, the higher education surveys. So among the respondents, we got staff from 4 active courses, active programs, 1 from a program that has been discontinued, and 1 that doesn't have a course yet, but they are interested in developing a course. We have a combination of full-time, part-time, and both in terms of type of course. The level, we have 2 from level 5 and 1 for level 4, like for level 4 and 3 for level 4, and then there's another probably, no course and course discontinued. Mix of full inclusive and targeted programs. So full inclusive would mean programs that offer a variety of courses, also including co-learning, so learning with university peers that don't have an intellectual disability. So it's full inclusive and more targeted programs. Targeted programs will be where the curriculum is built around intellectual disability and the courses are offered on that basis. Now, do you remember the inclusive resources mentioned by the employers? There's a striking difference when we ask the same question to the higher education institutions. So we see a larger variety of resources included and mentioned and selected. And we can see that there's some variance across, but there are some universal design for learning, inclusive teaching strategies, accessible and flexible communication as the norm, accessibility, including venues, teaching, and so forth. Those are the most mentioned, right? So we do have stronger, let's say, themes, and then a larger variety. Now, it would be really interesting to go back and try to uncover why this difference. What we can say that we noticed, this difference, and then we have some, some ideas of why this could be. And let's see about the student involvement. So how are students with intellectual disabilities involved at academic level when they are in college, academic level and also social level? So we see class reps, there's a different mentions here, mentoring, working with, for example, music and drama students, sports students, so students coming from other courses and other programs. There's again a mention of co-learning modules, clubs, societies, so really integrated within the university life. And for the course that hasn't started yet, there's an aspiration and a plan of students, being fully involved in the academic and university life. And overall, again, we have different responses, but a lot of positive intentions, a lot of, inclusive goals to be reached, and to make sure that students with intellectual disabilities are not like a separate unit on campus, but they are just students as anybody else, without, without overlooking the needs that they might have in order to overcome the additional barriers that they face. Now, findings for the interviews. This will require a little bit more time because it's always beautiful to go deep in what people tell you about themselves, about the, the experiences they have. But then there's a lot emerging from that. So what we did for the interviews, we applied thematic analysis. So we read the transcription. Well, first of all, we interviewed people, and Kathy has been doing the interviews, and Kate, both Catherine, fantastic. What a chance that will happen, but yes. So they had the interview, so they talked to people, and then we recorded interviews and we transcribed. So all the text of everything that has been said was then, we say, coded, which involved a software, a computer, that not many numbers. Well, what that means is that we select important piece of what is said, and we say, oh, this is this topic, or this means this. And then we create groups of themes. These themes that you're going to see in a second, we said, and now, how are we going to make sense of these things? So we applied a framework called ecological system theory by Brofenbrenners, was a scholar that has developed around the 70s of the past century, this beautiful display of systems. Now, I just want to explain this for the non-academic people, or for the academic people that are not so familiar with this framework. At the center, you have the person. So here we have the person with intellectual disability. And then that's the center, right? What they think, what they do. Then there's a microsystem around them, and that's the immediate circles. So who's right around them? Okay, so family, work, friends, could be like sport, could be any other environment that is very immediately close. And then we move a little wider. Okay, this is a little bit abstract. So don't think that people are actually, surrounded by circles, but it's how we can think of our life within society. We have the mesosystem, which is the interaction between these environments that I mentioned above. And then there's another very complex word, exosystem. The exosystem, it's all the indirect environments. So formal or informal social settings, other areas of life that could, connect with family, work, friend, the person. And then the wider one, the macro system, is about social, cultural values, attitudes, right? Attitudes were mentioned in the opening by Derval. Later on, dear Brofenbrenner also included the chronosystem, because all these systems are always in interaction throughout the life continuum. So that's the chronosystem, is the changes over time that go across someone's life, across these systems. I hope that that was clear enough to prepare you for the next slide. So the next slide is a visual representation of the themes emerged in the interviews with people with intellectual disabilities. So you see here we have, I guess there's also challenges, resources, support for the meso system. Everything that interacts between the closer system, the microsystem that is here, family, employment, peers, education, services. About themselves, they reflected and they mentioned, topics around occupation, resilience, life goals. But what was striking for us that we couldn't see from their responses, themes that could be placed in the other systems. Now, one explanation could well be that we didn't ask them about what they were thinking, around attitudes and bias and how, so that could be because we didn't ask directly, and that could be like a mistake of the research. Or it might be a reflection of how little they are integrated at this level of society. How, embedded is, the idea that they only have to look to their little garden and not have a wider scope in life. So again, we don't have answers for that. And being a researcher is about having questions more than answers. But that's something that we wanted to show. And if we wouldn't have used this framework, we wouldn't have probably seen this.
Again, Donatella, can I
Yes.
just say that what was really interesting was the challenges came out as the strongest. It was coded 62 times as opposed to other codes that might have been 10 or 15, like they were considered high codes. 62 codes came from challenges. So there are huge challenges there that people recognize themselves.
Thank you. So yeah, and then again, transition, of course, that is a, project around transition. You would expect that to come out, but it was important for them in terms of either challenges or even, aspirations, what they would like to do with their life.
And support.
And support as well.
Yeah.
Now, we tried to make a little bit, more sense of those themes that you saw placed in circles. Now, people with intellectual disabilities, the challenges. Now, we were able to distinguish between challenges that regarded higher education and challenges that regarded employment. We can see academic demands, comprehension, so the level of difficulties, the academic difficulties, lack of support. But do you remember how many strategies they have in education institutions where, saying are in place, but still lack of support? High stress and mental load, yes, welcome. That's student life, that's college student life. And it's good to see that there's a sharing of the same struggles of anybody attending college, right? We're not talking about separate group of people. We're talking about, students. Organization and orientation. So again, there are, some additional barriers that need, tackled. Communication and confidence, and identity and emotional challenges, right? So challenges that are within the person. And in employment, long waiting periods. Like we had interviewees that had probably like more than 10 years gap, they were around 30 or like,
Yeah.
so
Still looking for either higher education or employment.
yeah. So, we have these transitions that are so stretched that they become like, the normal, right? Extended unpaid work experience. And again, it's employment, but is it paid? Is it meaningful? Does it lead to any concrete long-term life progression? And parents sourcing work, a lot of reliance on parents and family support. And then again, unsupported work that led to termination. That shows there's a lack of structures within the workplace and a mismatch of skill set and work. So that would be what I would like to do, what I'm, good doing, and what I'm actually offered to do.
And then there was the other side of that as well, where the expectations were too high. It's like, because I'm doing so well with this job, people think I can do this job tomorrow, then any kind of preparation.
So there's like, two sides, of the same medal. And then we have the life goals, transition into special services, which, shows that there's support there, there's something in place, but also, shows that there's a limited expectation of what they can do. And these were things that came from the people themselves. They would say, have aspiration to go to college or to find a job, but there's a difficulty in achieving these life goals. There's, again, reliance on family, some are still waiting, and this wait is so, and I know this, and we know this from other, literature, other projects, other reports, other accounts, that weight can really lead to depression, can lead to, unfulfillment and a sense of unworthiness, which is, really, really dangerous for the overall quality of life of anybody. Support, family support for sure, and teachers support in secondary level and in living school, key worker and go-to person are important, SNA, school staff. But if you see, the support mentioned is all individualized support, right? And we will see this in other areas as well. That's why it's another thing that when we were discussing, we were saying, that's interesting, how much the support mentioned is individualized support. Some quotes. So these are real words coming from them, coming from different people. They are different colors just because they belong to 3 main topics here. Life goals. Do you want to read? Kathy? So yeah, so I don't do it at the top. Yeah.
So the first one there is I want to move into college to gain employment. That was a very regular theme that came up. I obviously want to get like a good job. So when we ask people, why do you want to go to higher education? I want to earn money. I want to be able to be independent. I want to support my lifestyle. I want a good job. Being a college student. So this was around the challenges, and I thought this was a really good quote because it encompassed a lot of the challenges in one go. Like, you're always worrying about like your assignments and what needs to be done, and are you on the right track, or the lecture there, or like there's always things that you're worried about when you're being a student. It's not always happy. It definitely spoke about how it was incredible being a student and all that they enjoyed and the friendships that they developed, all the positive things. But there were challenges around organizational skills, time management, people not understanding that they might be late or that they might confuse an assignment, or even to communicate the assignment to the support person at home was another challenge. Employability. So we did have somebody who we interviewed that was still waiting for either employment or a place in 3rd level. But this is what a different person said. I said, yeah, it took a year, yeah. And they said, yeah, she's right for the job, come in and then get work experience and start the job, and then got the job. So this person was told about, went for the interview, was told about the job a whole year before the placement actually happened.
Thank you. Thanks. So yeah, you can see, and of course we only could include a few quotes, but I think it's good to see the real words of the real people. Let's have a look at families. Now, the visual display is the same, so the circles are all the same. You can see that some themes are there as they were before for people with intellectual disabilities. The person in the middle is still the person with intellectual disability within the family. And again, occupation was mentioned, the skills, development, some challenges in, having an intellectual disability that has, some characteristics. And then we have, again, education, employment, services, the family, very important, and barriers. Sometimes we use challenges, sometimes we use barriers. Ideally, it would be challenges and barriers, because we could see how they really went along together. Resources, collaboration, and then we have policy in brackets, because somehow policy was mentioned, but not so obviously to make it to the theme, to become a theme, right? So this mention of policies, like indirect mentions, and then attitudes and expectation and a societal change that is very much wanted and requested by the families,
And acknowledge that it's slowly happening.
yeah. So the societal change is quite important to see how things are improving, but how much there's still more to do. And then again, transition. So all of this is alongside the lifespan.
Attitudes and expectations was very heavily coded in that group as well.
Something that we might have expected for the people with intellectual disabilities as well, because of so many self-advocates that want to. But that would be really interesting to see also the difference between people that are able to self-advocate and let everything out, or maybe people that need some more direct questioning in order to dig into those areas. And same, we looked at challenges and support for families here. Challenges, loads of challenges, and I'm sure these are not new challenges. Everybody was looking at this and saying, "Oh yes, of course, there's systematic and financial barriers." The financial barriers are not just around the expenses that having a disability take, but also the financial, and there's another mention later on. The financial struggles come from the social welfare payments and support that in a way kind of limits the possibility of progression in work, right? There's a disability allowance, there might be other form of social welfare support, and there's a limitation within what can be done in a workplace, right? So financial barriers at multiple levels, and also, may I say, attending courses in higher education, might also, require a financial investment.
Going back to the financial thing as well, what came up through the employers was pensions, which I thought was really interesting. Because again, if you're looking at short-term employment and you're looking at short hours as well, that has a big impact on pensions.
So it's like, there's an expectation that people with intellectual disabilities would work less. And, that places them in a kind of a little, trap. They can't progress, right? Even if they could, and even if they would like to. Lack of clarity or support. I'm not going to read through all of them, and it's a little bit text heavy. Lack of mainstream opportunities. There's societal negative attitudes. Again, maintaining meaningful paid employment is, it's great to get access to employment, but then what happens, next? It's just like a placement, is an internship, is a period of time, is it paid, unpaid? Where does it live? And when it's paid permanent, then I'm blocked, they see that there's no progression. In terms of support, the independent living outreach programs were mentioned. The post-secondary education PSE, post-secondary education programs, you know, were again mentioned as important but limited. There were mentions around not enough spaces, you know, we couldn't get access.
Competition, very, very high competition to get in.
So, yeah, and despite, you know, policies like PEER4, we see that although the accessibility to college level, to, you know, third level education has increased, there's still a lot of people that don't get on those courses. And then again, support, more individualized support, key workers, job coaches, independent living support, so roles, specific roles within services, family support, support in school, and also advocacy, emotional, informal support that we were discussing earlier, that was also around self-advocacy, right?
And a lot of that support comes from the families as well.
Yeah. So some quotes from the families, you want to read, so I can take the rest.
Okay, so the transition after secondary school. So I think in general, people felt that their son or daughter were prepared to leave secondary school, but then there was a gap there as to where they were going to go. So they had the skills to leave. I think choice has always been poor. I just think choice has always been, you know, this is great for you, so go for it. So that limited amount of choice, and it's like, we're offering you this, but it's not really a choice. And then in relation to PEER level education, it's extremely important to us because we just feel that she should be given every opportunity, like every other child. Everybody deserves an education. And I often felt for her when her sister was going to college. And again, that was the person that Donatella was talking about earlier, who waited 10 years to get a place in third level, which is very different to the role that her sister had.
Yeah. And yeah, and you know, it isn't uncommon in families to have, you know, children with intellectual disabilities and siblings without, and then you can see the difference even more, you know, striking. And let's have a look at service providers. Same visual representation, and you see attitudes and expectation. I'm gonna start from the, you know, the outer side, and societal change, very relevant. And then again, policy, interestingly, didn't make it to make, you know, its own theme, but there were barriers, support, collaboration. We see differences around what they said was important, or they mentioned around the involvement of people with intellectual disabilities, around roles and users' voice. They were very much focused on the person-centered approach, putting the person in, you know, at the center of what they do. But then when asked around roles, for example, in decision-making level around the service, there was no representation because they are users, you know? So it's kind of like that dynamic of,
yeah, I mean, it was person-centered and the voice was sought. So they looked at the voice and that was then fed into different committees. But in relation to kind of board management type of representation, that exists.
yeah, that's an important aspect, right? That we found interesting. To point out service organizations, so they spoke around how the service is itself organized, and then of course transition again was quite important. Some of the challenges that the service providers identified, a summary of them is lack of resources, time, staff, negative attitudes, lack of transport for people with intellectual disabilities to get to the service, the financial trap again, the medical card, they mentioned the disability allowance, limited work experience, although there's a lot of efforts in organizing and maintaining and developing and sustaining work experiences and employment, supporting people into employment, still there's a highlight of limited work experiences and limited informed decision making. And that's something that has been quite prevalent in the literature as well. From other research, who's making decisions in their life themselves? Is there, an assisted decision capacity? Is there like an autonomous decision capacity? In terms of support,
I just go back to informed decision making.
Yeah.
One of the examples was when they were working with students who were leaving school around employment, the majority of people were looking for catering because they had experience of that. So trying to get people to experience things outside of catering was the challenge. To make that informed decision, but there's more jobs than just catering.
Yeah, and I think we're not displaying today the findings from the interviews, with the employers and higher education institutions, because that will give even, a wider picture. The support that was mentioned, yes, responsive, client-centered, lots of strategies, active listening skills, adaptive approaches, again, job coaches, job developers, employment officers. But if you look at all this support mentioned, we see it as very much individualized, right? There's very little mention of more structured support that, involves other areas, not just the individual, but, those other systems that we saw earlier. Let's read some quotes now.
Yeah, the historic picture came up time and time again. So the barriers of exclusion. So it's historic. I think we need another generation. Yes, attitude is a barrier. And then a barrier, so that comes up
Yeah, probably
from our listening. So our National Advisory Council and our Regional Advisory Council, previous years, their topics were employment, education, having your voice heard. And in the past year and a half, number one has been transport and education and access. I think what that was, it was people with disabilities themselves were saying, it's great that these courses are now here, but I can't get there without asking my mum to drive me. I can't get there on my own. There's no direct train, there's no direct bus, and that was especially in the rural areas. And then the structured transition pathways. So like from the school leavers coming in, it's asking them what they want about what they want. We provide an individualized program. So it's all about the person and all about their needs. And that starts really, really early on, even from when the school leavers are leaving. But even that was a barrier because when services are working with the school leavers, you've got a system where you've got an application form or a referral, and then the referral is accepted, and all of that happens. And I think it happens by something like May that the offers go out, and then you've got, I think, a month or maybe 2 months left in the schools to prepare them for that transition.
So we're going to try to summarize the project outcomes. And we're going to try doing so, answering the research questions. So the first one, if you remember, was what challenges do individuals with intellectual disabilities face when transitioning from school to further education, training or employment, and in between. So there's a lot, right? 2 slides. And I'm not going to read through all of them, but I'm going to read the headings aloud. So personal emotional challenges, right? Structural and systemic barriers, institutional environmental obstacles. I think that for the personal emotional challenges, the individual difficulties like barriers faced, came out quite, quite strong. The high mental load and lack of tailored support, despite everything that is clearly put in place in terms of support strategies, very, thought out and thoroughly planned. In terms of the structural systemic barriers, I would like to highlight the inadequate government initiatives and unclear support systems. And Ireland is one of the pioneers, at least in Europe, in terms of policies like PEER4. We have the workability program, but still they seem to work a little bit in isolation, right? So although there's many positive policy initiatives happening, but still there's a little bit of they might not always be adequate to the demand of the population, because we still have a lot of exclusion within the area. Institutional environment obstacles. I'm picking it only the last one, inconsistent support and communication across services. As I said, initiatives seem to be locally developed, but there's no strategy at a national level on how these things could or might possibly work, in collaboration. So there are lots of, interesting and, important, resources out there, but still there's some gaps. The employment-related issues, lack of job match, that's the one that I would pick. And again, the inadequate support in the workplace, the high demand in the workplace, the need of more resources, more staff, more time, sometimes also financial, cost involved as well in having, the possibility of spreading the workload in a way that employees with intellectual disabilities can be supported if they need, and is not overloading the amount of work that an employee without intellectual disability has to do, right? And social and attitudinal barriers. Unfortunately, the low expectation and negative attitudes from, across society is still something, quite powerful, and the limited interaction with the non-disabled peers. Then we have the second research question: what challenges do stakeholders face while facilitating these transitions? Now, resource and capacity constraints, that is, a recurrent theme. It's not something new, but it's something that is confirmed. The systemic and structural issues. And again, I would like to pick one here out of every, of all the rest: the lack of clear pathways into and out post-secondary education. And again, there are beautiful examples nationally and more locally, but it's still very much based on a local developed model rather than, a broader structure that could be perhaps not implemented but developed in collaboration. And then the policy gaps and the absence of strong government initiatives in this sense, in terms of putting all these perspectives together around the table and having, a big conversation with all the stakeholders and people involved. Knowledge, training, awareness, employment specific challenges, and again, the financial disincentives. So the need of training has come quite strong as an outcome. The fear and stigma around intellectual disability, which is somehow still there, and it's still to overcome. And again, the difficulty matching, the skill set with the meaningful job, enjoyable job as well. Everyone would like to do a job, which is enjoyable as well as meaningful. and need for long-term employer commitment. Do you remember the low retention rate? So that's linked to that. The third research question, what resources are out there? So specialized roles and support staff. There's inclusive education support. There are programs and initiatives, employment level. The OWL program has been mentioned a few times in the interviews, but highlighting how it's a work experience that then doesn't really lead to anything concrete. You know, it's great to do, but then what's next? Do I get the job? Do I get, you know, some had unemployment, not of our interviewees, but they were mentioning the families. Someone got a job, but, you know, our child didn't. And there was a lot of,
Yes, service providers mentioned that it is a successful program. People get employment after it, but then the disabilities and families themselves said we didn't get it. We were so excited, we were very hopeful, then nothing came of it.
So you see, there's a lot of support out there. We have another slide. The community and interagency collaboration. So the collaboration between all the stakeholders, all the systems that we saw in the beautiful circles displayed before. But how are these put in dialogue? How is the communication? How is the linkage between those? And family school-based support, again, very, very important. Employer training and awareness. So there are all these resources out there. There's plenty of. It's the way that they work, is how they work and how they work in interaction with each other. So we have some conclusions, some considerations, because these are preliminary findings still. So something more in depth, if that wasn't enough, could emerge. Some considerations: transition to education and employment. There's lack of choice still, lack of choice, limited exposure to different works, type of jobs or type of courses, limited progression. So what's next? How, where is this leading to in terms of my life? Over-reliance on families and lack of guidance. So there is guidance, but at the same time, it's fragmented, it's inconsistent. So families have to do a lot themselves, and they do go to services, but services, if they are in touch with or like already in collaboration with some other, for example, third level institution, then there's a pathway created there, but for others might not be that that clear, that easy. Fragmented responsibilities. Now, we have policy frameworks. We have Path 4, workability. How do they link to each other? Do they link to each other? Wherever, considered, as, one leading to the other. And there are multiple departments involved in terms of policy, a policy level. And it's difficult to put, all these in communication and collaboration. So that's something, we want to consider with this project. And there's no unified cross-sectoral strategy or leadership, which is, is something quite important because it makes so difficult having even, the successful initiatives, programs, and even employers that have a strong, ethos, inclusive ethos, but then what happens to all the others? Structured pathways, they're not consistent, and we see that where we have structured pathways, there's success, or at least there's a higher success, and the outcomes improve. And there's gaps in national coordination. So there are many successful local initiatives. TCPID has a very strong reputation and has been leading over the years, and even, building the business networks, but that's one example. What about the other? We want to see at a national level, and ENIF, we want to mention ENIF, who kindly helped, disseminating when we were recruiting. So there are networks for ENIF. It's a forum of higher education institutions that come together. They have an interest either running a program or to running future a program for people with intellectual disabilities. It's good to see that, there's potential, it is possible, but it can't be, isolated. And again, the inclusion of people with intellectual disabilities within the policy making processes. And, again, Derval, at the beginning, you mentioned, consultations, there's a lot of advisory groups, but then when it comes to decision making, where are really their voices? What's their role, right? So we do have to consider some limitations of this study. Despite big ambitions and good achievement, we did have a small cohort and a large volume of data. So that really made the analysis time intensive, and there's a low response compared to the anticipated sample size. We would have liked to have more people with intellectual disabilities on board. It was very difficult to get them to take part. So that's something that we want to highlight. Time constraints. Data collection analysis took longer than anticipated, and the preparation of accessible materials, even going through, ethical approval that leads to the recruitment difficulties, creating different. So when we do research, we need to prepare a leaflet with all the information, consent form. We need to run everything through ethical approval. So it's, our university that has an ethics committee that says, yes, you can go and do your research or not. There are some ethical issues here to consider. It was a little bit hard to coordinate the participation, and the rural voices are still unrepresented. So we have national coverage, but rural voices still underrepresented. We do believe that there's a need for more participants and greater diversity of perspectives. We did have, some service providers, but not many, as well as employers, right? Some, but not many. And more links are needed to reach to people with intellectual disabilities, because probably even trying all the networks that we could access at a national level, we still got a very low response. So there's, for future research, there's still some consideration to be made. And I would like to thank everybody, and of course, Inclusion Ireland, and my fantastic companion, Kathy, and also Kate, that worked at the beginning. I'd like to thank the head of school and David. I'd like to thank the Irish Research Council, now Research Ireland, and all the people that participated, especially people with intellectual disabilities, because that was really about them, and anybody else that I forgot to thank. Okay, and I would like now, if you don't mind, to stop sharing my screen and ask Conor McGuckin, Professor Conor McGuckin. Hello, I don't know if you can see me, but
I can see Derval.
that's even better. That's even better. And if we would like to have some words from Professor Conor McGuckin, who is the new, can I say new, director of TCPAD, Trinity Center for People with Intellectual Disabilities. And thank you very much for agreeing to do the closing remarks, Conor.
Thank you, Donatella. Can you hear me okay? Yeah?
It's a little bit low, but I don't know how to turn this. Oh, yeah. Go for it. That's all the volume we have.
Sound check. Am I doing better now?
Oh, just a second. Try now.
Am I doing okay now?
Yeah. Oh, sorry. I don't
Yeah.
know what happened. I can start it just a second. Okay.
What about now? Doing okay?
It's still a little bit low, but I don't know how to. Oh, thank you.
I'll try maybe and speak a bit louder.
We can hear you fine, it's just, it's not that, it's up as high as it says it can go, so.
Okay. No problem. Thank you, Donatella, and congratulations to you and Kathy on the completion of what is such important work. And a huge thank you to your research partner, Inclusion Ireland. As I said, nice to see Derval there today. To the funders, as you mentioned, and to the participants for allowing us to hear and learn from all of those insights. My comments and observations at this point relate directly to the research, but I think also to the broader issues that the research is embedded in. And you spoke about Bronfenbrenner and the wider ecology. So it's more sort of comments and observations about that as well. And as I was thinking about this afternoon, and I was thinking that, you know, for me and for some people who are at this launch this evening, there was never really a question for us as to whether there would be educational or employment opportunities for us whenever we were young. It was really just assumed that those opportunities were there. And it was just seen as natural that these opportunities were there. And I think what this research highlights again, and I think unfortunately, is that those opportunities are still not universally available for everyone. I think obviously we have advanced so much as a society in terms of our thinking and our attitudes about issues related to disability and educational and social inclusion. We still, as you've pointed out, have a lot of joined up action to do. And I think what the research clearly highlights is that we need to continue in that work that we have. We need to remove those structural and quite often unequal barriers to participation. And I think obviously we couch this kind of conversation. We talk a lot about inclusion. We talk a lot about inclusive education. But what we don't talk about quite a lot is exclusion and being excluded from the conversation, being excluded, and that our voice doesn't matter. For these learners and for all of us, educational participation and the opportunity to engage in meaningful work of our own choosing really go to the heart of it and signify, I think, two important things. One, that we belong. And we talk about belonging, but sometimes what's even more important, because people can tell you that you belong, but we need to feel that we matter. So we can be included or told we're included, we can belong, but do we matter? And I think it goes to the heart of some of what you talked about, Donatella, from the research. Ultimately, deep down, each and every one of us are psychological beings. We're all filled with our own desires. We all have a need for self-fulfillment. And I think largely, whether we overtly say it or not, we all continually maybe deal with the issue, asking ourselves the question, who am I? And when we ask ourselves that question and we reflect on it, quite often we find that the answer relates to how other people see us, to maybe our own attainments, about relationships we have in education and the work that we do. And then imagine if we don't have that opportunity to fully be able to answer that question of who am I? I think that ultimately leads to feelings of being less equal, being less than. I think going back and talking an old currency, We still need to have equality of access, but that can only be matched with equality of opportunity. And this relates to the old currency of widening participation and the ambition that we should have, and rightly have, that the universities that we have, the educational establishments that we have, and the workplaces should be truly representative of the society that we sit in. We shouldn't be leaving anyone behind. Even as I've thought about this today, and on a very personal reflection, without widening participation initiatives, I certainly wouldn't be here this afternoon. I wouldn't be here to talk to people. I didn't complete my school and my school days successfully, but I was presented with a very beautiful opportunity to return to education, to engage in education. That opportunity that was provided to me at that time was seen as very radical. It was seen as very forward thinking. But that approach now today is just seen as a very normal route into and through higher education. So really and realistically, what was uncommon has now become very common and very normal. And I think as we go away this evening, we all have a job to do, whether or not we are family members, friends, or advocates, whether or not we are the education providers or employers. Whenever we identify challenges in the research, what we always need to look for are the opportunities. And Derval, at the start, you mentioned it was nice to be back in Trinity. And I think it's very fortunate that this research was completed in Trinity, where we have absolute academic freedom. We have a great chance to develop practice. We hope to have good policy that leads to good practice, that leads to good experiences and good outcomes. I'm here, I represent the Trinity Centre for People with Intellectual Disabilities. In that work, we can see what these students can attain. We can see the barriers every single day of what these students can knock down. They knock them down, they get them out of their way. They're educating us. It's bi-directional. They're educating us every single day of what they're capable of and demonstrating real leadership and real ambition. And they're taking that not just to their own colleagues, but they're taking it out into the wider university as full participants in the university and also in co-learning experiences. So it isn't just unidirectional. When they're given an opportunity, and we have real good thanks to give here to the leadership of Anne Devitt and School of Education, to the Provost, these students are part of, they're not separate to the rest of the students in this university. You mentioned some of the policies and the policy initiatives. We are very fortunate to have a government here that currently is supporting 11 of these programs across the country. We're in a pilot phase, but every indication is that we would hope to be mainstreamed. Those 11 courses will give ambition to others within further education and higher education, and the ambitions that we have for other learners who similarly need to have these opportunities as well. You mentioned, Donatella, the fantastic work that INHEF, the Inclusive National Higher Education Forum, does, ably chaired by Des Aston in the centre. We also have the Included network of some of the partners in the Path4 programs, very ably being coordinated and led by Jill Woodnut in the centre. But what we need to do is realise these ambitions in employment and in the business sectors. We have the consortium with some of our colleagues who are online from Down Syndrome Ireland, from Inclusion Ireland, ourselves and others. We just need to keep meeting and keep putting these things on the agenda and move them towards the business partners. We can't do it all within education. We need to have a seamless kind of an approach: education, employment, guidance counselling, and real opportunities for these learners. And as you said, Donatella, this is all about the ecology. It's about what's in the microsystem, the mesosystem, the macro system. We've had so much goodwill, but we need to move beyond goodwill. We need to have these Path Forward programs. We need to have other programs. We have the ambition. We just need to join the dots and keep that going. And I think as we leave this evening, we just need to renew those ambitions. Yes, there's going to be the barriers that you've identified, but there are possible solutions there. There are things that we can just get ambitious about with these learners and for these learners. We need to exploit those opportunities all together, not separately. And I think I just finish off by saying best wishes, for the rest of the research, for the rest of the project and the dissemination, and for the much needed conversations that will happen afterwards. And just two final things. We need to make sure that the people who are at the absolute center and leading that conversation are the young people and the students and the learners who have an intellectual disability. We need to appreciate, we need to hear, and we need to amplify their voice. And we need to change some terminology. We need to stop talking about job. We need to talk about career. We need to talk about career development. And rather than just we've moved to getting a job, getting something in catering, everyone has their own ambitions. I have my own ambitions. I live in a republic, and my understanding of that is that everyone is equal and everyone should be equal. And we need to keep pushing to have that equality of access, equality of opportunity, and the people who need to be at the center of that conversation, because their voices matter. They are well able to represent themselves, and they need to tell us what we need to do. They are the experts by experience. And I just finished by saying, thank you, Donatella, thank you, Kathy, thank you, Inclusion Ireland, and everyone who's here. I think this is a hugely important conversation. And thank you to colleagues who've joined us from outside of Ireland, to Sue and to Helen and to other people as well. And thank you to colleagues who are here, Marie Devitt, Barbara Ringwood, I know, is in the room. And I'm probably missing some people, but we're only doing what we do because we have that mandate from these young people with intellectual disabilities. Thank you, Donatella.